For decades, archaeologists believed the Roman town of Herculaneum got lucky. Unlike Pompeii, where roughly 2,000 bodies were eventually recovered, excavators at Herculaneum found only a few dozen remains inside the town itself, and for most of the 20th century, that low number was read as good news. The assumption was that most of Herculaneum's population had successfully evacuated before Mount Vesuvius buried their city in 79 C. Then, in the early 1980s, archaeologists started digging along what had once been the town's ancient shoreline and found the actual death toll had been sitting there the entire time. More than 300 skeletons, packed tightly into a row of stone boat chambers along the beach, exactly where the town's residents had gone to wait for rescue boats that never arrived in time. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what that discovery revealed about how these people actually died, what forensic science has determined about just how fast it happened, and why one specific skeleton, still wearing 2 gold rings, has become one of the most studied individual victims of the entire eruption. Subscribe before we go in, because this is one of the clearest, most physically documented disaster scenes to survive from the entire ancient world. Start with the eruption itself, because understanding exactly what hit this shoreline is essential to understanding what the skeletons actually reveal. On August 24th, 79 C, the traditional date, though some researchers argue for a slightly later date in October based on other physical evidence, Mount Vesuvius erupted catastrophically, burying the surrounding region under volcanic material for days. Pompeii, further from the volcano, was primarily buried under falling ash and pumice, a slower process that gave many residents time to flee before the worst of it arrived. Herculaneum sat much closer to Vesuvius itself, directly in the path of something far more sudden and far more lethal, a series of pyroclastic density currents, fast-moving flows of superheated gas, ash, and rock fragments that can travel at speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour and reach temperatures well over several hundred degrees Celsius. These currents don't give you time to run. They arrive and pass through an area in a matter of moments. For most of the 20th century, Herculaneum's low recovered body count inside the town was genuinely treated as evidence the population had largely gotten out ahead of the disaster. That changed with excavations led by archaeologist Giuseppe Maggi beginning around 1980, which uncovered a row of arched stone chambers along what had, in 79 C, been the town's actual beachfront chambers historically used to store boats, now commonly referred to as fornici. Inside these vaulted spaces, excavators found the remains of well over 300 people, packed together in tight clusters, evidently having sought shelter there while waiting for evacuation by sea. The eruption reached them before any rescue could. This single discovery fundamentally overturned the earlier assumption about Herculaneum's fate. The population hadn't largely escaped at all. A very large proportion of the town's residents appear to have made it exactly as far as the shoreline, and no further. The pioneering scientific study of these remains was conducted by American physical anthropologist Sarah Bizzle, whose detailed skeletal analysis throughout the 1980s gave researchers an unusually complete demographic and biological picture of a Roman-era population at the moment of a single shared catastrophic event, something almost impossible to reconstruct from ordinary archaeological contexts, where burials accumulate gradually across generations rather than in a single instant. Bizzle's analysis identified men, women, and children of a wide range of ages among the boat chamber victims, and her work on their bones provided genuine insight into everyday Roman-era health and diet. Bone density, evidence of past injuries and healed fractures, dental condition, and indicators of nutritional status across the population. Information ordinary archaeological digs rarely offer in this kind of detail, because skeletal remains from typical Roman burials are usually recovered individually, over long periods, rather than as an entire cross-section of a single community's population captured in one shared moment. Among the recovered remains, a handful of individual skeletons have drawn particular attention specifically because of what was found with them, since these personal details make the human scale of the event immediate rather than abstract. One skeleton, now commonly referred to as the ring lady, was found wearing 2 gold rings and several gold bracelets, including bracelets shaped like coiled snakes, a design genuinely popular in Roman-era jewelry. Her possessions suggest a woman of some means, who, like everyone else sheltering in these chambers, still ended up facing exactly the same fate regardless of wealth or status. Another notable skeleton, found holding a sword and equipped with tools consistent with military or naval equipment, has often been interpreted as possibly belonging to a soldier or member of a rescue party, potentially someone specifically sent to help evacuate residents, who instead became one more victim of the same disaster he may have been trying to mitigate. These individual identifications remain interpretive rather than definitively proven, since no inscriptions or independent records confirm anyone's specific identity or role, but the physical context, the jewelry, the equipment, the postures in which bodies were found, gives researchers genuinely meaningful clues about who these people likely were and what they were doing in their final moments. The more forensically significant research, though, focuses on exactly how these people died, and this is where the science gets genuinely striking. Research led by volcanologist and physical anthropologist Pier Paolo Petroni, published in a study appearing in Nature in 2001, examined skeletal remains from the boat chambers and identified a distinctive reddish and blackish mineral residue on many of the bones. Chemical analysis of this residue found it consistent with iron and other minerals present in human blood and body fluids, deposited directly onto bone surfaces, a pattern Petroni's research connected to a process of extremely rapid, intense heat exposure, severe enough to cause soft tissue and body fluids to vaporize essentially immediately upon contact with the pyroclastic surge, rather than the victims dying more slowly from asphyxiation or a more gradual burn injury. This research proposed that exposure to the initial pyroclastic surge, estimated in some analyses at temperatures potentially exceeding 500 degrees Celsius, could have caused death within a fraction of a second, before the body had time to register conventional signs of a slower death, like defensive posturing or prolonged suffering. Some of the recovered skulls also show fracture patterns Petroni's team interpreted as consistent with a rapid buildup of steam pressure inside the skull, from brain fluid boiling instantly under that level of heat exposure, a genuinely severe finding, and one that connects directly to a separate, similarly striking discovery made at another Herculaneum site nearby, where a single victim's brain tissue was found to have actually vitrified into a glass-like solid state under comparable extreme heat conditions. It's important to be clear that this specific instant death by vaporization interpretation, however widely cited, isn't universally accepted without qualification across the volcanology and forensic archaeology community. Some researchers studying pyroclastic flow behavior more broadly have argued that temperatures in this specific range, while severe and almost certainly fatal, may not necessarily guarantee truly instantaneous death for every single individual, and that some variation in exposure, shelter, and position within the boat chambers could mean death came somewhat differently, and for some individuals slightly more slowly than a uniform instant vaporization model would suggest. What isn't disputed is that death came fast, that it was overwhelmingly lethal to essentially everyone in these chambers, regardless of age or physical condition, and that the physical evidence on the bones themselves, the mineral staining, the fracture patterns, the postures in which bodies were found, genuinely supports an extremely rapid, violent thermal event rather than a slow suffocation from ash inhalation, which had been an earlier, more commonly assumed explanation for pyroclastic surge deaths generally. What makes this discovery matter beyond the forensic detail is the human decision-making it reveals. These people didn't panic randomly or simply fail to react. The evidence strongly suggests an organized, rational response to an unfolding crisis, residents specifically moving toward the shoreline, seeking shelter in structures built for exactly this kind of purpose, in what was almost certainly a reasonable attempt to wait for evacuation by boat. A plausible and genuinely sensible plan given the geography and the town's relationship to the sea. The disaster that killed them wasn't a failure of judgment. It was a pyroclastic surge that outran any timeline in which that plan could have worked, arriving with a violence and speed that gave essentially no window for a different outcome once it began. It's also worth noting what this discovery did to our broader understanding of Herculaneum's total population and eventual death toll. Before the boat chamber excavations, the low number of bodies found within the town itself had led some researchers to estimate a comparatively low overall death toll, assuming successful mass evacuation. The addition of over 300 confirmed victims from the shoreline alone forced a significant revision of that estimate, and raised the strong possibility that additional undiscovered remains may still exist along other unexcavated sections of the ancient coastline. Sections that in some cases remain unexplored due to the practical challenges of excavating beneath the modern town of Herculaneum, which sits directly above much of the ancient site today. So here's where this actually leaves us. Real, physically documented evidence recovered gold jewelry, a sword and equipment beside a likely rescuer, mineral residue analyzed and published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, skull fracture patterns consistent with catastrophic heat exposure together tell a specific human story about the final moments of over 300 people who made a reasonable decision under genuinely impossible circumstances, and paid for it with their lives in what the strongest current evidence suggests was a matter of seconds. It's not a mystery in the sense of an unanswered question. It's a fully reconstructed disaster scene, nearly 2,000 years old, preserved specifically because volcanic material buried it, sealed it, and kept it essentially untouched until archaeologists finally dug in the right place to find it. If a single stretch of ancient shoreline can hold this much forensic detail about the exact final moments of 300 specific people, there's a real possibility the rest of that coastline, still buried beneath a modern town, is holding just as much.